Alright, so now we're also going to talk about ways to prove two triangles are congruent using some type of relationship between the angles and sides. So there's only a few different ways you can do that. Not every combination of angles and sides proves two triangles are congruent, but you must have a combination of at least three. You've got to have at least three corresponding angles and sides to prove that two triangles are congruent. Now we're going to talk about a couple right here in this video, and then we'll do a different video on the rest of them. But just talk about two today. First one is side, side, side. So basically what this means is all three sides we know are congruent to all three sides of the other triangle. So right here, if we see one tick mark on AB and one on XY, that tells us that's congruent. So that's one side that's congruent. And we see two tick marks on AC and two on XZ. Now we know, oh, well, AC is congruent to XZ, so we've got two sides congruent. And then if we see 3 on BC and 3 on YZ, we know our third side's congruent. So once we know all three sides are the same length as the three sides on the other triangle, we know that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. Notice that A and X are corresponding angles, so I've got them first. B and Y correspond, so they're both second, and C and Z correspond, so they're both third. Okay, you got to make sure again the angles have got to correspond. So that's an example right there of side, side, side congruency. All three sides of one triangle are the same lengths as the sides of the other triangle, so we know those triangles are congruent. And remember, congruent means exactly the same. They're like twinsies, right? Twinsies. So another way we can tell is side, angle, side. So notice it says it has an included angle. What that means is there's an angle in between two sides that are the same. So you've got an angle that's the same in between two sides that are the same. So right here, maybe I tell you DE is congruent to MN. And then I tell you angle E is congruent to angle N. And then I tell you angle EF is congruent to angle, or sorry, not angle, side EF is congruent to side NO. So we've got a side congruent, and then we've got an angle congruent, and then we've got a side congruent, all in a row. Alright? So this is an example of side, angle, side congruency. So now when we see that, we know everything else on the triangles is exactly the same. Angle M is the same as D, O is the same as F, you know, the length of DF is the same as MO. We know everything else is exactly the same on the other triangle. So we would say triangle EDF congruent to triangle, and then the corresponding part to E is N, and then the corresponding part to D is M, corresponding part to F is O. Alright, so that's an example of side, angle, side congruency. Now this would not work if we did this. Okay, if this was our other line, we don't know it in this. We can't say side, angle, skip this side and use this side. Okay, that doesn't work to say side, angle, side. We couldn't do that. It's got to be the angle right in between the two sides that are congruent. All right, so it has to be a side, the next angle right beside it, and then the side right beside that angle. They have to be congruent. All right. So let's look at a couple examples. Okay, so right here, let's state if the two triangles are congruent, and if they are, how we know. So number one right here, we got a one tick mark here and one tick here that tells us those sides are the same, they're congruent, and these two angles are congruent because they both have one arc. So are these two congruent or not? We might say, well, we only have two parts. You said we've got to have three parts to determine it. Well, you've got to use a little bit of reasoning here. If these two triangles share this side, right, then this side is the same length for this triangle and for this triangle. So we do have three parts: side, angle, side, side, angle, side. So we would say, yes, these are congruent by SAS, side, angle, side, because they share this side. So of course that side's the same for this triangle and this triangle. And so they've got a side, angle, side, and a side, angle, side that are congruent. So we can say, yes, they are congruent. All right, so right here, Number 3, yeah, we skipped some of these. This is some problems working with the other congruence properties. We'll talk about those in another video. So on this one, you've got this side is congruent to this one, and this side is congruent to this one. Well, of course, this side is congruent for both triangles. We'll put 1 mark on it. So it's the same for this triangle and this triangle because it shares a side. So this one has 1, 2, 3, and it has 1, 2, 3. So this one is also congruent by, this time, side, 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 because it's got 3 sides that are congruent. Right, let's look at one more. This one's got 2 marks and 2 marks. And then this angle right here is congruent to that angle right there, and this side right here is congruent to this side right here. Right, so looking at it, you might say, okay, well, that's side, angle, side. This side, that angle, that side. This side, that angle, that side. But the problem, right, is this angle, it has to be in between the 2 sides. It has to be side, angle, side. The angle has to be between the 2 sides, like it is right here. The angle's in between this side and this side. But right here, the angle is not. It's outside of the 2 sides. It would need to be down here. So this one, we could not say it's congruent. So right here, we would have to say no, or not congruent. Either one's fine. Alright, so that one is not congruent. Alright, couple other problems. So right here we're going to state what else we need, what other information is required in order to know they're congruent for the given reason. So they give us a reason and they want us to say, well, what else do we need to know to say this is true by Sss, or whatever property they give us. So right here they tell us this side CH is congruent to this side CD. We obviously know CE is congruent to itself. So what's the other information we need to know? Well, we need to know this is the same as this. They didn't tell us that. So what we would want to say is we need to know that DE is congruent to HE. That's the information that we need to say it's congruent by side, side, side. We don't know those 2 sides are congruent. So looking at this one, we know this side is the same as this side, and we want to figure out what do we need to know to prove this by SAS, side, angle, side. They share this side, so obviously this side's the same. So what do we need to know? We need to know that the angle in between our congruent sides, the angle in between the congruent sides is the same. So what's the angle that's in between these 2 sides? Well, it's angle X. What's the angle on this triangle that's in between the 2 sides we know are congruent? That's angle Y. So what we'd want to say is we need to know angle X is congruent to angle Y. Or you might say angle WXY is congruent to angle CYX. Oop, not CYZ, CYX. Because those are your corresponding parts. Right? W corresponds to C, so we need to do W and C. And then X corresponds to Y because they're the ones that have the angle arc on them. And then Y corresponds to X. Alright, so those are some examples of how you would use side, 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 and side, angle, side properties to determine if 2 triangles are congruent. Time to practice. Thanks.